Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. And this is an idea that I've had actually for a while. It's a topic that I've kind of brought up in different videos over the years, whenever it's relevant. And I was listening to a couple of artists, one in particular that I'm going to talk about in this video, where this applies. And I don't know, it just hit me. It's like I should do like a whole video just like on this topic because it's always been really interesting to me. So here it is. And I picked 10. I'm going to rank them from 10 to 1 because we love ranking things, right? So here's the topic. Here's the deal. An artist is a major part, really important part, often like this, the or one of the major songwriters in a big band, a band that everyone knows, beloved band, huge success, whatever. Then they go solo, have a solo career. And what's all often really fascinated me was how these artists sort of handle their solo career as like musically. Do they just kind of stay in the style of their famous former band, or do they just go off in a totally different direction, maybe even a different genre, right? And to where their solo work is so distinct from the work that they had done with their band. And of course, that's what I'm really interested in, is when they do that. So we have a ranking here. I'm going to rank these solo careers based on two criteria. One criteria is just how great their solo material was. But equally important is how different, how much did they differentiate their solo music from the music style of, that the band that they were in. And they, I think in almost all these cases, were a chief songwriter for. So that's the deal. That's the task at hand. Now, the scoring, I don't know, about 50-50, maybe. I'm going to, kind of weigh just how great the solo material was, in comparison to the work they had done with their famous band. But then also about 50%, how far did they veer from the style of their original band? And the further they went, the more points they will get in that area. So, all right, here we go. So number 10, this very scientific ranking. I've got Paul Simon, obviously from Simon and Garfunkel, his previous group. And I like a lot of Paul Simon's work. I'm not a huge fan of all of his solo work. I made a video a little while ago about my total love for Rhythm of the Saints. I love this record. And but yeah, so kind of looking at how different was his work from Simon and Garfunkel. Well, yeah, obviously Simon and Garfunkel was very rooted in folk, but then they expand, they had pop elements and some other things like that. Paul Simon's solo career, especially starting in the early days. Now, I'm not an expert on Paul Simon, like all of his work. I see some through lines, which is kind of why I have him here at the end here. But some through lines, from Simon and Garfunkel into Paul Simon. But definitely some different stuff. I think he got a lot more personal, in his solo work almost immediately. Albums like these, his earlier work, and of course, with Graceland and Rhythm of the Saints, he definitely goes into a lot of that world music stuff. But you look at the last Simon and Garfunkel record, Bridge Over Troubled Water. They were already kind of experimenting with some world music elements. So some of that stuff was present. Number 9, I'm going with Mr. Lou Reed, his former band Velvet Underground. Now, I like love a lot of Lou Reed's solo work. I don't love all of his stuff, his solo work, and I really do hear kind of a connection, moving from the Velvet Underground work to the solo work as well. So, I mean, the stuff on Loaded and other Velvet Underground records, I hear the same guy, So that's why I have a number 9. Number 8, I've got a twofer. All right, so same band, but 2 members from this band embarking on solo careers. So the band being Cream, of course, the the very first power trios coming out of the late 60s, with, of course, Ginger Baker on drums, Jack Bruce on bass, Eric Clapton on guitar, Clapton and Bruce also sharing some vocal duties, although it's mostly Jack Bruce. Well, we can address Eric Clapton first because he was the main one I thought of. And then once I was thinking about it, Clapton, I was like, wait a minute, well, Jack Bruce did a lot too. So let's do the twofer, because I honestly prefer Jack Bruce's solo career over Eric Clapton's solo career, if you're going to be honest. But anyway, let's talk about Clapton first. He's the bigger name. So Clapton, obviously Clapton is this guitar god coming out of the 60s. Cream, is sort of one of the great power trios. You know, a huge element of that is Eric Clapton's fiery, blistering guitar work and all that stuff. And after he does kind of the brief Blind Faith supergroup with Steve Winwood, and then there's the Derek and Dominoes thing. But then he kind of settles into where he's been for decades and decades into his solo career, releasing just records under the name Eric Clapton, and kind of moving into the 70s. He released some successful records like Slow Hand and what's the number, 461 Ocean Boulevard, right? Now, I'm actually a big fan of these records. I like these records a lot. But, I mean, to this day, fans of Clapton's playing still complain, at least a certain quarter of those fans, or, portion of those fans, complain that, these are too laid back. He needs to return to the playing of his Cream days and all that, right? And I mean, when Clapton was hugely influenced by the music of the band, J.J. Cale, and it's kind of more in that sort of more laid back style, wanting to play it more in sort of a band context than spotlights on solos and soloists and all that kind of things. But yeah, so I think the reason I don't have Clapton higher is I think a large portion of his solo work is not very good, especially when you get into the 80s and beyond. I'm just not a fan. There's some of it I like, but I actually really am a fan of some of these 70s albums. I think these are still really good. But he definitely gets points for veering way off into a different direction from the Cream sound, even if a lot of people still complain that he should go back to, or he's too old now anyway, but should have gone back to playing like that, anyway. Real quick, Jack Bruce, though. I love Jack Bruce's solo work, and I think he was incredibly talented guy. You listen to some of these, these solo records that he put out, Songs for a Tailor, Harmony Row, and there's many others. After Cream, none of them, of course, were huge sellers. He didn't have this massive solo career like Eric Clapton did, which I think is a crime because Jack Bruce should have been way more recognized for these records are so good. I mean, go listen to these records if you're not familiar with them and you like his work in Cream. Amazing stuff. And he, I mean, if anything, he kind of increased the complexity of his songwriting and work post Cream. Yeah, so good stuff there. All right, number 7. I've got a guy that I mentioned in my vinyl tag video very recently, Colin Hay. There's me and Colin Hay, right? Colin Hay from Men at Work. Now, I mentioned there, and I need to do a Men at Work Colin Hay video because I haven't actually done a video focusing all that stuff. But Men at Work are one of the very first bands I ever really, really got into. Right, Business as Usual, and Cargo. They only put out 3 studio records. Two Hearts is the other one. They only put out 3 studio records, so Men at Work did not last too long. But they were huge in the 80s, if you remember. And I will fight to the death about the quality of these. I love these records, these Men at Work records. But what a lot of people are not aware of is Colin Hay, after Men at Work, embarked on a very long, still going. In fact, he's coming to town, coming here next year. I was going to go see him. A very good solo career. Now, his solo career never reached the heights of Men at Work as far as sales and popularity. But yeah, and he struggled. I remember seeing a solo show of his in Austin. around 2000, around the turn of the century, somewhere around 1999, 2000, somewhere around there. And it was in this small little club in Austin. And I'm not exaggerating. Like I'm really not kidding. I'm not saying this just for hyperbole. Uh, I think there was about 8 people in the audience. 8, like including me. He still came out, played a fantastic show, hung out, signed autographs, chatted with it. He's just the coolest guy. Anyway, but his solo career, you can hear some through lines with Men at Work on some of his solo albums. Oh, well, by the way, that was a nadir, but he is actually he's actually pretty well known now. I mean, you go to shows now, he can fill theaters now. So he's. I'm happy to report his solo career is doing very well. Very well. So there you go. Anyway, um, but very much more into kind of the singer songwriter path on his solo career. In fact, he has like this one, Going Somewhere, which I love. Yeah, he has just some solo acoustic records. He's a great guitar player. A lot of people didn't know that from the Men at Work days because Ron Streichert, of course, doing most of the leads in Men at Work. But Colin Hay's a really good guitar player. Really expressive on the solo, on the acoustic guitar, especially. So he's got these great kind of solo acoustic singer songwriter albums, like Going Somewhere. Although my favorite in that vein, he also has a lot of full band albums. But my favorite in that vein is Peaks and Valleys. This is kind of hard to find nowadays, but man, if you can find a copy of this is I actually have his his autograph, his signature on there. So, but this is so good. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, Colin Hay. I think and if you go to his shows, he still plays a ton of Men at Work songs, and he knows what people want to hear. But his solo work is really really good too, really good. Okay, number 6. I mentioned this guy's name in passing when I was talking about Eric Clapton, but here is where I do have Steve Winwood. Steve Winwood, he was kind of this child prodigy, right? I don't know, child prodigy, but he gained a lot of attention, when he was still a teenager, right? In the music scene. First real band that he put together and led, of course, is Traffic. Which I love. Traffic. Go, back on this channel at some point. You can find it. We did an album ranking of Traffic albums. Which they started out doing a lot of real interesting experimentation with folk and that kind of thing, but then in their later years, their later albums, Traffic got into kind of almost jazz fusion stuff, experimenting with a lot of jazz stuff, improvisation, expanding out. And Steve Winwood's solo career sounds, although it's kind of interesting, his more recent records, he has returned a little bit more to the Traffic style. But for decades and decades, his solo work was very different from Traffic. This record, I talked about this a long time ago. I need to do a Steve Winwood video and ranking. I haven't done that yet. It's one of the ones I plan on doing. So we can talk a lot more about this album in there. But this album is brilliant. Arc of a Diver. This is one of those really cool records, where it's just like the one guy, the one artist does everything. Like Winwood recorded it all himself in his home studio, played all the instruments, did all the vocals, did all the mixing. The only thing is he does usually collaborate on songwriting a little bit. So, but as far as like playing and singing and producing and all that, when Winwood did the whole thing. It's one of the, I think the earlier version or earlier examples of that. Sort of the auteur. Anyway, what year was this? This was 80. Not on there. Always put your dates on your album. This is really bothering me. Man. Yeah, 19. I got it right. 1980. Look at that. Anyway, I'm so proud of myself. Yeah. So, yeah, there you go. That and then I mean, as you know, he had huge success in the 80s. This was his biggest selling album back in the High Life. This was a massive hit, and I love it. By the way, I'm all in on his. Well, I don't know, not all. There were a couple records after this that I thought were kind of mediocre, but this I mean, I'll defend this all day. Yeah, it's total pop music. It's total 80s pop. It's fantastic. So good. Anyway, but about as far away from traffic as you can get. All right. Number five. Number five, I am going with Mr. Peter Townsend. Pete Townsend. And so Townsend, I think, is the only guy, yes, the only guy on my list here who sort of maintained his solo career, at least in parts, while his main band was still going. So he kind of maintained this parallel solo career while the Who, right, while the Who, was still happening, and or at least in spurts, right. And so I really focus on the kind of early to mid '80s period, when the Who was active and Townsend put out his best solo albums. Because in the '70s, while the Who were going full time and were one of the biggest bands around, every once in a while he did release a little solo album kind of on the side, but it was a real small thing. But in the early '80s, he really, I think, in earnest wanted to get his solo career going, and maybe out of loyalty, I don't know, but tried to maintain the Who for a little while in the early '80s as well, right? And so I gotta reorder these records here. So the Who, were releasing after Keith Moon died, right? The Kenny Jones years, the Who, Face Dances and It's Hard, these Who records, which I'm a fan of, by the way. That was one of the very first. Was it the first? It may have been the very first album ranking this channel ever did. Was the Who? Ugh, I cringe. And I don't even want to go back and look at that because I don't think I was nearly as comfortable in front of the camera as I am now. But maybe redo that one. I don't know. But I haven't watched it since I put it out years ago. But I think it was the first one we did. Anyway, even in that video, I mean, I defend these records. I like these early '80s Who records. They're not great all the way through, but they have each one of these two has some really good songs on them. But it was painfully clear that Townsend was keeping his best material for his solo records of the same time period. Empty Glass, All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, which I have always maintained this is a masterpiece. I love this record. White City, a novel, which is fantastic as well. Honestly, this trilogy of records in the early to mid '80s, I think are brilliant. It's so good, much better than those Who records. So, um, how different? What I mean, you can definitely hear some through lines there, with from the Who material of that time and these solo records. I mean, these solo records were a bit more kind of singer songwriter ish, although musically they still had a lot of bombast and full band stuff, but just lyrically, a little more, or actually a lot more confessional and that kind of thing. So anyway, all right, number four. Number four. Oh, actually, I'll put this stack of records up here. Number four, I have Mr. Gordon Sumner, right? Sting. Sting and the Police. Sting from the Police, right? Now, first of all, the Police are one of my very favorite bands of all time. Now, we go back there. I did a Police video a long time ago, and I love the Police. One of my very favorite bands. And I will clearly state that Sting was never better than when he's with Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland. There is some combustible magic about those three guys together that Sting was never able to capture, on his own. But when he embarked on his solo career in what was his debut? I always check these dates, right? 1985. 1985 is when Dream of the Blue Turtles came out, his first real solo album. When he embarked on his solo career, I thought it was like a stunning shift. And so I still admire the hell out of him for this. I mean, he did not try to just continue to make Police albums. I mean, it was these records. His first few solo records were records that the Police just would not have made. And so I really admire that, right? I mean, to me, that at least said, okay, there's a good reason you wanted to. I mean, because I think it was Sting mostly who decided to break up the police because you had other things to say that just couldn't be said through the vehicle of the police. So you know, as much as I worship the police and I wish they had double the amount of albums that they actually put out, um, I can at least respect Sting's decision because these records totally different thing. And so that's why I have him so high here. The reason he isn't like a number one slot or anything is because I think a lot of his solo career is really boring. Um, it's really his first three solo albums that I love. I think are just great. And then he settles into this real kind of actually got more successful as far as sales and charting singles and stuff, but he just found this kind of formula that to me just got really boring from about his fourth record on. 10 Summoner's Tales. I have it on CD. I didn't pull it down, but from like 10 Summoner's Tales, which I think is all right. That's a good record, but I kind of wish it had just been a little pit stop and then he gone back to doing more interesting stuff. But that became kind of the template for the rest of his solo work, and it got successfully more boring. But this solo record, Dream of the Blue Turtles, I think is just like so innovative, and I respect him so much. I think it's cool that he stopped playing bass for a little while. He's gone back to playing bass on his albums, but he I think I got Daryl Jones right to play bass, and he just decided to play rhythm guitar. Like totally, let's get out of that sound of the Police, right? Because Sting's bass playing was such a key element of the Police sound. And he surrounded himself with these at the time real young, up and coming, great jazz musicians. He made a band out of basically these great jazz musicians. Branford Marsalis on the saxophones and Kenny Kirkland on piano. I cannot tell you how important Kenny Kirkland was to some of these early Sting records. Kirkland unfortunately died at a young age, but Kenny Kirkland was an amazing jazz pianist. He's on these. Was it Omar Hakim? I think on the drums. Well, it's right here. Yeah, and then Daryl Jones on bass, right? And just these great jazz, and so good that I'm glad he did this. But one record into his solo career, he releases a double live album, which one says a lot about Sting's ego, right? But it is justified here because, I mean, you don't know how long he's going to be able to keep this band together. All those guys are going to be doing other things, great jazz musicians. So yeah, get this down in a live recording with these guys. And this is fantastic. Bring on the Night. I mean, really stretch out with these jazz musicians. It's a fantastic live record. Actually, they made a movie from it too. There's a film back. I only saw it at one time a long time ago, but love the record. And and it's cool because they do some of his solo songs. Obviously from this, but they pull out some Police songs too. But with these musicians, they're really kind of interesting versions. And then of course, Nothing But the Sun, and then the Soul Cages, which I think is just brilliant. Just brilliant. This is his masterwork to me as a solo artist here. And then again, unfortunately, I think he got kind of dull after that. But man, those first records, love it. Number three. Number three is a guy that I made the previous video about when I was announcing his new record. But yeah, Peter Gabriel, right? Peter Gabriel, of course, coming out of Genesis. I think Peter Gabriel, maybe. I don't know. Like Peter Gabriel is probably the best example of a guy who, at least commercially, his solo career was much bigger than his days in Genesis. Now, Genesis are revered in progressive rock circles. Those Peter Gabriel era Genesis records, which well, go watch our old Genesis ranking, that we did on this channel. I love Peter Gabriel era Genesis, but yeah, his solo career, he definitely kind of started to streamline. Peter Gabriel's one of my very favorite artists, so I love his solo career, obviously. But he really, he kept that spirit of experimentation, definitely from the Genesis days. But I would not call his his solo career progressive rock. Whereas Peter Gabriel era Genesis is one of the titans of progressive rock. Very much streamlined the songs, shorter songs, but still with a lot of experimentation. Obviously, Peter Gabriel brings in a lot of that world music elements that really weren't in the Genesis stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, I would. Whereas, Genesis is progressive rock with Peter Gabriel. I would say his solo career kind of more art rock. I don't know, but then obviously get to the '80s with the pop success of So and all that stuff. So yeah, but yeah, no, these Peter Gabriel Genesis records are just genius, genius. All right. Oh, just this isn't one of them, but since we're talking about Genesis and Peter Gabriel, I mean, probably ought to mention Phil Collins because he had a somewhat notable solo career, didn't he? So although I'm not putting him officially on this list, I just need to mention him, but just because you know I don't think his solo, at least in the '80s, his solo work was all that different from sort of the pop sounds of '80s Genesis. I guess starting with the Genesis album on. Um, yeah, so that's why I didn't include him. And with Phil Collins, I actually really like his first three solo albums. Face Value, Hello, I Must Be Going, which is my favorite of his actually. The No Jacket Required. I, I'm sorry, in my opinion, after these three, the rest of his solo career's kind of garbage. But it's just me. It's just me. But I like his first three solo records. Okay, number two and number one are really the reasons I wanted to make the whole video in the first place, because it's like these two guys that I think of the most when I think of this topic. And the guy in my number one slot is the one I've been sort of on a kick with lately, listening to a bunch of his solo records, which led me to like, let's just do a whole video on this in the first place. So, but in my number two slot, I have Robert Plant. Led Zeppelin, of course. Robert Plant. Uh, he was so smart about his solo career, Robert Plant. He probably I don't know, probably my favorite Plant solo album. I should have pulled it. I didn't pull it. Is Now and Zen. But the only reason I didn't pull this out to feature is because I don't know, out of all of his solo records, this one kind of references Led Zeppelin the most, which sort of defeats the purpose of the video. But but if you look at the vast majority of Robert Plant's solo career, it is vastly different from Led Zeppelin, and it had to be. And I applaud him for recognizing this from the get go. His earliest solo record, his first few solo records, right? Principle of Moments, which is great. And think about the hits off of this song, or off of this record, In the Mood and Big Log. I mean, really kind of more quiet, more almost noir type of stuff. Very like not Led Zeppelin, right? And yeah, and then of course, and I have a lot of this stuff on CD. I didn't pull it off the shelf, but his in this century, his work with Alison Krauss, and just a lot of his solo work, his more recent solo work, the last couple, last 20 years or so, um, just really good. It just carries this really great moody atmosphere, kind of, infused with blues and folk and stuff, but also, like I said, almost sort of a noir feel, and kind of nice use of synthesizers to modernize it a little. But it's also kind of rootsy, and just how he has used his voice, like how his voice has aged, and how he has brilliantly adjusted his musical styles for his voice is just like, I mean, I admire the hell out of him. And I don't know. You compare his solo career to say Jimmy Page, right? Jimmy Page has been really spurts and stops and starts, but Jimmy Page's solo work, or work with later groups that he, like the Firm and David Coverdale, later groups that he kind of worked with a little bit. They all kind of look back to Zeppelin's sound. I mean, Jimmy Page, I don't think has ever gotten out of the shadow of Led Zeppelin. Uh, Robert Plant just from the get go just moved forward. And I really do appreciate or admire, respect that. All right, my number one pick though, and like I said, why I'm doing this video as far as like what I was thinking about in the first place is Robbie Robertson, of the band. Um, just this is his debut solo album, right? We did a video on the band. To go watch that. I love the band. But this and the rest of his solo work could not be more different. I mean, sonically especially, but even lyrically, it's really different. But you could see some connections sometimes in the lyrics. But musically, I mean, is this the same guy? I mean, it is about as far away from the band sound as you can get his solo work. I respect the hell out of that. I because Robbie, I know there was litigation, there was all kinds of disputes over songwriting in the band, but generally acknowledged that Robbie Robertson was the primary songwriter in the band. So that guy wrote these songs, you know, and I would love to find the rest of his stuff. I have all the rest of his albums on CD. I don't know. I've been looking for Storyville, his second solo record. I've been looking for this on vinyl forever. I would love to have this on vinyl, but and then Music for Native Americans, Contact from the Underworld of Red Boy. Is this the band? No. I mean, just I'll just hold up his debut though. Um, produced by Daniel Lanois. That tells you a lot right there, right? He gets on his solo debut. He gets some assists from some heavy hitters. Peter Gabriel is on here with him. U2 is on here with him, and this came out 1987. We're talking like Joshua Tree era U2, and they come on here and play on this. you know, uh, but this is still like his record. He's not really. I don't know. You might argue that the U2. I was going to say U2 song. The song "Sweet Fire of Love" sounds like a U2 song with Robbie Robertson guesting. But other than that, I mean, this is still Robbie Robertson's record, and it's just I've been listening to this record a lot lately, actually, I've been listening to all this stuff a lot lately. So yeah, just kind of a noir sound, kind of like Robert Plant, but even more. Heavy use of synthesizers and programming and like all this, this technology that is so far away from the kind of Americana of the band. It's just like totally opposite. And he even bathes his guitar in all these effects. Kind of sounds like Jeff Beck sometimes, although not the skill of Jeff Beck, but at least kind of some of the sounds. These really kind of these crazy guitar sounds, and it's just amazing. I mean, this is like not the same artist, you know. So anyway, yeah, I put Robbie Robertson up here, and vocally, he's got this rasp. You know, the band had three. I mean, count them, three just stellar vocalists. Robbie Robertson was not one of those three, right? And so for him to step out and start singing, but again, like Robert Plant, Robertson was so smart about crafting music where his, you know, not beautiful voice really does fit in the fabric of the music. It's kind of like a sort of like a Tom Waits rasp almost, but not quite as harsh as Tom Waits. But uh, and he does these great songs where like the lyrics are kind of like spoken word, kind of Lou Reedish sometimes, and like actually his biggest solo hit is on here, Somewhere Down the Crazy River. It's so great. Out Hell's Half Acre. Real quick, the song Fallen Angel, which is a song he wrote for Richard Manuel, from the band. Manuel had died in the 80s from suicide. Uh Peter Gabriel's backing vocals. I'm not even going to call them backing vocals because they are so essential to that song. The way Robertson and Gabriel go back and forth in that chorus is just, it is the most gorgeous, one of the most gorgeous songs I've ever heard in my life. God, it's so good. Anyway, just very briefly, you know, well, Storyville, his second record, is so great. Kind of this focuses on New Orleans. It's sort of a thematic record, but it doesn't sound like New Orleans music at all. I mean, again, it's like all these kind of moody, but lyrically, and then I can't say enough about these two, especially this one, music for Native Americans and Contact from the Underworld of Red Boy. You know, these are all songs with Native American themes, but it's so brilliant how he mixes. It's not just like traditional drums and chanting and stuff. He mixes that stuff, but in with like very modern programming and synth. It creates this really haunting mix of stuff. I mean, yeah. Robbie Robertson's first four solo records, his final two, not such a big fan of, but those first four solo records are, I think, just. Uh, I've been kind of obsessive about him this last week or so, which is why I made this video. Anyway, all right, what do you guys think? Do you like my choices or not? Comment on that. And obviously in the comments, give me your own. Do you have some examples of artists who were, key elements of a major band, but then went solo and really distinguished their solo sound and music, made it very different from that of their famous band? Well, let's go. Let's hear it. And we'll see you next time on Amity Tracks.